Hello, I'm Will. Welcome to ResearchPod. It is easy to forget that efforts to break down the culture of silence around men's health and men's well-being is a relatively recent endeavour. Initiatives like Movember put the physical and mental health of men on full facial display, but the psychological roots of masculinity, trauma, and violence run deep. Men's suffering rarely exists in isolation from the people around them, and modern life comes with a great many problems to bear. In this episode, we are joined again by Dr. Christine Wekerle, who has for the last 8 years served as editor-in-chief of the journal Child Abuse and Neglect, and is also the newly appointed co-editor-in-chief of the journal Child Protection and Practice. She is also guest editor on a special issue of the journal Digital Health, dealing with mental health innovations for youth resilience, and more information about her JoyPop app can be obtained through the youthresilience.net website. Content warnings for this episode include suicidal ideation, sexual violence, domestic violence, and child sexual exploitation. And joining us once again from McMaster University, Dr. Christine Wekerle. Hello there.
Hi, Will. Lovely to speak with you again.
Thanks very much for having us back. For anyone who might have missed your previous episodes with us, could you tell us quickly a bit about yourself, your research, and where the work that you do fits within a broader research context?
Sure, absolutely. So my PhD is in clinical psychology. I really started out wanting to do interventions that help people, especially young people. And so the areas that I went to work in all surround violence prevention. So that includes child maltreatment impacts, adolescent dating violence, adult intimate partner violence, and that has broadened out to some of the understanding of structural violence in working with Turtle Island, as North America is known, indigenous populations, and particularly I've worked with the Six Nations of the Grand River.
Well, the last time we spoke was freshly in the shadow of the pandemic 3 years ago. Could I ask, how you've been doing personally and professionally, and what shifts you've seen in interventional research over that societal shift that came in the last few years?
Whenever you have adversity, including violence or otherwise adversities, you will always have resilience. That is one response to adversity. With the COVID onset, for me personally, I very quickly went to the resilience switch, and I put out a deep breathing exercise on my Instagram just for anyone who wanted to see a strategy to calm yourself. This kind of resilience routine or practice that you could, without any money or professional assistance, you could follow this kind of deep breathing routine. And I had a child who was really quite anxious about the COVID, and as many young people were feeling high anxiety around what is this? Do I die from it? These kinds of things. And so part of our daily resilience routine during the COVID pandemic was actually painting. We both enjoy painting. And so we would do some painting every day.
In a professional sense, looking at child protection research and child protection professionals, how have you coped with doing a lot more remote work, being isolated from not just individuals, researchers, colleagues that you're working with, but some of the communities that you might otherwise be developing interventions with? And how are professionals looking after themselves?
Yeah, I think there was a big scramble at the outset of COVID because all of a sudden policies weren't really for emergency preparedness in place. So there was a scramble on how can we creatively still reach our clients? How do we make the Zoom or online environment or Teams, whatever your platform was, how do we ensure that it's first secure and private? And then secondly, how can we add more personal touches so it feels more like a real connection? And so there was, believe, people were very creative about that. Maybe, there was, yeah, as you would do in a normal group therapeutic setting, you focus a bit more on icebreakers and those kinds of things. I think a smile goes a long way in person or online, and telling jokes still works. So I think there was a lot of shifting, trying to figure it out, recognizing that, teens especially do need to connect with teens. Some of, say, for instance, child welfare youth would say their only friends were at school. So once they were in the online environment, they weren't in that social connection space. And we know social connection is one of the strongest resilience factors. So I think people are adaptable, and there are also limits, and it takes some creative problem solving to problem solve around that. I think professionals did get there, but there are many trends that were very different from the outset of COVID to during COVID. So at the very outset of COVID, reports, child abuse neglect risk reports dropped. The educators who were not right away online or in classroom, who are majority reporters, they weren't reporting. Childcare personnel was not reporting. People were frightened of hospitals, so they weren't going to the emerge rooms as they were. So the initial response was a drop. But then as COVID persisted, and especially with things like being having mandates to stay inside, so you're now forced in potentially very close quarters with a partner who tended towards, say, domestic violence, or expressing their frustrations physically, what we did see is therefore an increase in intimate partner violence and an increase in physical abuse, especially towards the older males, age 8 and up, especially like 10 and even 16-year-olds. And this seems to have held globally, because a global analysis looked at the rate as being 18%. A couple of interesting things is that whenever you're going to have physical abuse, you're going to have psychological or emotional abuse, and likely emotional neglect. So those rates went up as well. And I suppose what's, especially disturbing, because it happens to infants and toddlers and is much more injurious and potentially long term quite damaging physically, is abusive head trauma. And that might have been called shaken baby. And that also went up.
Where we sit now in November 2023, has there been any, I suppose, an ebbing of the tide, things returning to either how they were, or have certain trends held out as a new normal, as so many other phrases have been coined?
Right. I think the data is still out there, because we what those data that I was citing to you were publications in 2023. So it takes a while for data to come out. So I would look to answer that question based on the research that's available in 2024. Whether we've been able to normalize. One of the other things that happened during COVID is women who had young kids exited the workforce in large numbers, and that COVID uh, shut down small businesses, and people experienced unemployment. And unemployment was correlated with the greater violent physicality. So if we're seeing job return, then you would expect to see a reduction in the physical violence, in part. Might be one reason.
Well, to centre this around November and Movember and the initiatives across the globe for men and their mental health and well-being, with the increasing scrutiny of giving it a named month, has there been any turning of the page on stigma around men's mental well-being?
Well, I think the stigma still remains. The helplines did try to do a boys' helpline, but ultimately they didn't persist with that because you have to have a whole set of awareness campaign to be able to get to the point where the male calls the helpline. And I think that um, there's still quite a lot to be done in school curricula. There has been a big boost in social emotional learning curricula, and I think that is a positive trend because when you think of the issue of violence, um, we're really looking at emotion regulation issues. And if we are targeting early on the emotion regulation skills, being able to take a pause and breathe before you react, being able to label emotion words, having that literacy, understanding alternate strategies, and even being able to walk away. These these kinds of positive strategies of de-escalation skills are really important, and that can be more integrated into a curricula. And the idea of actually having kind of mental health curricula or resilience curricula is really important step forward.
And there was one of your papers that came out just after we uh, spoke last time, December 20 paper on the need for global analysis of the sexual exploitation of boys. Did that identify any key barriers? You mentioned the curriculum as being an opportunity there, but in terms of hurdles and workarounds beyond what we've talked about so far?
Right. So Dr. Mark Kavanaugh, who was with ECPAT and now is with Evident, really led that initiative to delve into the sexual exploitation of boys. And Child Abuse and Neglect Journal did do a special issue in 2023, and that's available for people to look at. And we did identify a number of domains of barriers. So in some countries, uh, legally, there's no such thing as boy rape. So that um, there's no possibility for any kind of justice because only rape of girls is defined legally. Unfortunately, among practitioners, even, there is a persistence of the myth that boys can't be raped or that any sex is good or that it's a boy could have fended off their offender. These still persist among the practitioners, so you can easily jump to the idea that when a boy victim may be seeking help or even medical treatment, that a bit of victim blaming would be present and a lack of trauma informed care. So that we did see that from both attitudes and barriers. The boys themselves, because we looked at both quantitative and qualitative data, so the boys themselves would articulate the same that they weren't welcome in medical service settings when they need to have sexually transmitted disease and related issues attended to, and that there weren't boy specific spaces, that there are girl specific shelters, but there weren't boy specific spaces. And it's so difficult, therefore, to be able to reach out for help. The other kinds of issues is that those individuals who offend against boys may include authorities such as police officers, people of power in the community. And so the victim is doubly victimized by not only having to sustain the actual victim behaviors, but the lack of acknowledgement, validation of their victimization. And so, again, we talked about emotional abuse before. People may think, well, someone was physically assaulted in their sexual victimization, but there's always that emotional trauma component as well. Some of the specific examples also involve the household. So there's a view that the male, no matter the fact that they're a boy, even a very young boy, is responsible for bringing in money to the household or other resources. And there's a tolerance of it being sexual exploitation in some communities. And that's just, again, such a betrayal. We talk about betrayal trauma, that your family is saying, well, go out, I need, the parent need medicine, or want a new car, or your younger brother needs to go to school, you know, secure those funds. And some parents are very well aware of what happens, what's underlying that money that comes back, and maybe some just don't know, don't ask, right? So there's, quite sadly, this household push to boys to be earners. And again, that's a gender norm that, children should be children. Children have a right to play. Children have a right to live and survive. They have a right to be free of violence. These are all, so, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, owing from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, that pretty near every country in the world signed off on, except for the United States. So every country, it's, the proof is in the pudding, I guess. You signed off. That means you had responsibilities. And what are you doing about it? I think a really challenging, discrete scenario is in Afghanistan. You have this tradition. It's really Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. You have a tradition of chai tea boys, bachabazi, where they abduct or purchase from the family these young boys, teach them how to dance. They even perform at weddings, but they're sex slaves. This was pre-Taliban, and we do have one article from Afghanistan in our special issue. And the the situation is, these are powerful men with money, or in government, or in the army. Not only do they utilize these boys as sex slaves, they also utilize them as potential proxies for conflict resolution. And there has been cases when one of these boys were killed, so that, some conflict between two powerful people were resolved. At 18, or when they grow facial hair, they're kind of released from this bondage. But then, now that the Taliban has taken over, they become ideal recruits with their rage, to be suicide bombers, or to do whatever on that side of things. And so they're just victimized, like bounced around the system, social systems, and victimized. Do these kids have a chance? Do they ever get a chance? And the U.S. military were aware of that when they were in Afghanistan.
Well, to come back to the household, in terms of centering things around dads in parent and child relations, rather than intimate partners or to the wider society, what is needed of dads and what is needed for them?
Well, I think dads need as much support for positive parenting. I see many good movements on social media where dads are celebrating kind of good fathering. And that social connecting and support group of dads to dads, I think, is really, really important. That dads getting together and not only supporting each other as dads, but maybe getting together socially, as dads, as you would see a group of women go walking to the park and sitting there chatting while the kids are playing on a playground. A dad group would be a wonderful idea as well. And many male figures step up if there isn't a dad. So, an uncle or a neighbor, um, there are many people to come in. Uh, it's clear that what a child benefits most from is these kinds of close relationships, um, and that organizations bring risks, as you may be aware. The incredible fallout of Boy Scouts, Big Brothers, tremendous child sexual abuse, huge child sexual abuse issues wherever there is, um, an organization. Of course, you're going to get pedophiles going to the organization. So the Boy Scouts had a huge settlement recently. It's so sad because there are these resources, but parents have to be very on guard to, screen, pick up the clues if the kid says that they don't want to go to that organizational meeting and things like that. But uh, there are slowly programs like actual psychological programs, therapeutic programs supporting dads in existence. And I think that, the research shows that at certain points in development, dads are super impactful. So for tween girls, their relationship with their dad really is very impactful for the kind of partner relationships they might move towards. Dads can have that conversation as, let me tell you about, some things that I've learned or witnessed.
To pick up on the note there you mentioned of the development of programs, we can also go to the development of tools. And in our previous episode, we spoke about the JoyPop app and mobile health telehealth. I imagine it's been an interesting couple of years for mobile health initiatives. Could I ask you for a catch up on what's been happening with the development and rollout there?
Sure, absolutely. Again, we talk about what are the core skills and processes that we want to, work towards, what will give you a lot of bang for your buck, and emotion regulation being one of those core skills. And so the JoyPop app is a youth resilience app designed for adolescents to young adults, and it has a number of features and a game in it that is designed to give positive experiences where you can, work through not only some of what might be bothering you in a day, but staying in touch with those positive emotions. Because one of the, clear research facts is that when you're feeling stress, your focus of attention narrows. And so you will miss positives. You'll miss positive in your kids, you'll miss positives in yourself, you'll miss positives in the environment. And it takes some effort then to like really kind of stop and smell the roses, um, to notice those positives, to self reinforce, self reward, and to reward others. So the Joy Pop app is quite organized around these positive experiences. Our research continues to encourage us to do more research that shows we do indeed see, in a month of using the app, we do see significant gains in the ability to emotional regulate. We do see drops in depression. We know that male depression is one of the predictors of intimate partner violence. We do also see that the app itself is considered enjoyable, and uh, that uh, people are recognizing that is helping them to be more in touch with understanding about their emotions, detecting their own patterns, and really being used as a routine. So, out of say 28 days of the research, people report using the app 20 days, usually about twice a day. So it is something that does have take up, and we're currently in a randomized controlled trial with Dr. Ashton Musquash in Northern Ontario, Lakehead University. And we're expanding the app to support the professionals. So we did do a study with social work students, and we did do a study with Indigenous youth and Indigenous community members to start to understand, how do different groups that may use the app feel about the app. Generally, it's always very positive, and there are some adaptations, as you might imagine, to say cultural groups. They would like to see their own icons or some of their own teachings. So that's basically where the app is. It's a research project, it's ongoing, and we hope it just continues to expand.
Do you see there being any limits that this could reach, or is there something to be taken from the JoyPop style of engagement for everyone?
I think there's some value for everyone because emotional regulation is such a core issue. And what we're really talking about is personalization to a community. And that is pretty reasonably done within the app, that we can make those kinds of adaptations. If, we're in the business of getting research grants for these kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, to do like even a language switch is pretty easy with an app. And, that preliminary work to work with community to understand what would be most beneficial. So we started to work on a wellness wheel that is kind of developed from the medicine wheel teaching, which really talks about your holistic health. So, not just your physical or emotional health, but also your spiritual health, and sorting activities within to that. So, you could track how balanced you're being in these four quadrants. We've started to do some of that adaptation work, whether it will be, changing language, adding some language words, altering our prompts for the journaling activity that will be more culturally or group relevant, bringing in a new feature. These are things that we can accommodate doing.
Well, we've had a bit of a whistle-stop tour in the last 30 minutes to summarize the last 3 years, but bring that into even sharper focus. If anyone listening to this has skipped to the end, what would you like for them to take from this conversation?
Well, for anyone, I'd like to offer the idea that, resilience is within you. It is a muscle that you flex and grow. There are resources out there, and no matter what adversity or stress you're in, you already are being resilient, and you can identify some of that. The other piece I would like to say is to policy persons is that investing in resilience tools, especially in places and points of developmental transition, like the transition to colleges and university or the transition to high school. This is really, I think, an area where you will get bang for your buck because you're dealing with so much mental health issues and suicidality that if you take a proactive approach, an ounce of prevention is worth the pound of treatment needs. Prevention, health promotion is a payoff to you in terms of other costs. For instance, for our JoyPop app, the activities you can pop in there for less than 2 minutes and get something out of it. So it doesn't have to be labor intensive. It can be just those little breaks you put in your day that pauses your stress or rumination, that shifts things for you, and that kind of helps with resetting your emotional trajectory, even in, points of challenge. When I see some of the footage from Gaza and A child will smile because someone is saying some nice things to them or asking them a question about something. And in the midst of the nightmare, the child will smile. And that child's smile, in turn, brings a lot to the adult. There are many small joys that we can grab onto and that can help sustain us.
Dr. Wekerle, thank you so much for your time again today, and I hope to speak with you again soon.
Thank you. We'll have a joyful day.